Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are back in session. We are continuing with the debate on Mr. Kuzmierczuk's motion. The next on the speaking list was Ms. Vignola, but we have Mr. Fortin is subbed in for her, so we will go to her. Oh, no, we have a speaking list. So it's Mr. Fortin, then Mr. Genuis, then Mr. Sousa, and then Mr. Kuzmierczuk. And this is the speaking order on Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment. Mr. Fortin, welcome to OGGO. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a pleasure to be here. Ms. Vignola will be joining us in a few minutes, as quickly as possible, at least I hope. But she is on the way from Quebec City. In the meantime, what I can tell you, Mr. Chair, is that I have a proposal for an amendment to table on behalf of Ms. Vignola. But I understand that it is not the time to do so, if I've understood correctly, after our discussion. We are currently working on other amendments to withdraw paragraphs G and H from the motion. Is that correct? Is that where we're at? So I would say that I have a motion for amendment, but I will hold it and I will table it when we have finished our work on G and H. In our opinion, Mr. Chair, with due respect, we think that these provisions are not necessary. G in particular is not necessary. H, we are somewhat in favor of keeping in the document. G does not seem useful to me at this stage, but we won't debate it at length. We will submit to the will of the committee. But if we must vote, I would say that we will vote to withdraw G, but we will vote to maintain H.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fortin. Mr. Genuis, the floor is yours on the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Because we're continuing from earlier committee meeting this morning, I just want to reiterate kind of where we're at and the lines in the sand from our perspective in the Conservative Party. So, Chair, we have put before the committee today a motion to get contracts for our awareness and the awareness of the public about how billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is being spent effectively in corporate subsidies. We have proposals from the government for billions of dollars worth of corporate subsidies, and we hold to the fairly modest proposal that the people should be able to see the details of those agreements. We note that it has recently come to light that in one particular case, at least, that there appear to be a very large number of foreign replacement workers being brought in to work as part of this subsidized project. As such, we feel it is reasonable and urgent for this committee to request access to these documents so that Canadians, the taxpayers, the people whose money we're spending at the end of the day, can understand the terms of those agreements and what is actually going to be the impact of them. We've heard in this discussion that Liberals do not want these contracts to be requested. They oppose this motion, and in the meantime, they will do everything they can to water it down because they do not believe the taxpayers have a right to this information. This is consistent with what we've been seeing for the last 8 years, which is the complete lack of respect for taxpayers' money from this government. But in the process of trying to water this down, they have effectively tried to take the teeth out of this motion. That is, they've said, okay, if we request the documents, then we don't want to have a mechanism for the committee to follow up to ensure that those documents are actually delivered. We have added a provision such that if the documents are not provided, the chair may make a report to the House, and that this would initiate proceedings which provide the committee and the House with tools for insisting on the production of the said documents. If we do not have provision G or H in this motion, then there is no mechanism for ensuring that those contracts are actually delivered. This is, of course, what Liberals want. Ideally, they would have no motion at all requesting this contract because they do not want to share this information with the public. But if there must be such a motion, they would rather that the motion be toothless, have no enforcement mechanism, because it will be their intention not to provide these contracts, certainly not in a way that's transparent and will allow the public to access this information. And so they have moved an amendment to remove G and H from the motion, trying to remove teeth and enforcement capacity from this motion. As we have said earlier, provision G, the request for an immediate report to the House, is a nice to have, but is ultimately less important. Provision H is crucial. Provision H only kicks in if the documents are not provided. If documents are provided as requested, provision H is irrelevant. The fact that Liberals are keen to remove Section H underlines that they intend not to provide these contracts to the committee. If they intend on providing the contracts to the committee, leave H in. It's no big deal. It's only a provision that applies in the event that the documents are not provided. But because Liberals are so keen to have H removed, they are making clear to the committee that they do not intend to provide these documents. The Conservative position on this is clear. The Liberal position on this is now clear. The question then is where the other parties, where our friends in the NDP and the Bloc stand on this matter. I believe the Bloc have made clear, and I'm pleased by that they agree with us at least that provision H should remain in the motion, which is not an automatic report to the House, which is simply a provision that kicks in if and only if the government does not provide these documents. So the deciding vote on this will swing to the NDP. Whether the NDP sides with the other opposition parties in insisting on accountability and transparency, in asserting that sunlight is the best disinfectant, or whether the NDP votes with the government in a way that facilitates the burying of these contracts. The government has made clear that their intention is not to provide these contracts, which is why they want Section H removed. So the NDP now has to decide if they will vote with us to keep H in and insist that the documents be provided and that there is a mechanism for ensuring that the documents are provided, or whether they will vote with the government for the removal of H, which in effect will mean that the government will not provide the documents to the committee and the government will stymie subsequent attempts to hold them accountable for it. I hope that this committee votes in the majority to order the production of contracts that provide details on corporate subsidy deals worth billions of dollars, and parties that stand for the interest of taxpayers, parties that put the interests of people ahead of the interests of corporations, will vote for transparency and will vote to keep Section H in this motion, and therefore oppose the amendment from the Liberals to strike it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Mr. Sousa, please, on the amendment.
Yeah, on the amendment. So I have a lot more to say, obviously, in the general motion, but on this amendment, we already have Section F, which states that we will supply the documents to the clerk within the period of time that I think is being suggested, and we may amend that as well. Without redaction, that's how it's being presented at this point. So G and H, by deleting that, we're also being sensitive to some of the confidentiality matters of the documents. The members will have the opportunity to review them more in depth, and I think that's appropriate without compromising the situation and the competitiveness of what foreign direct investment requires. And I find it rather surprising that the members keep continuing to provide for this when we already have other committees also requesting the same documents going forward. So I reinforce the issue that the documents are being asked to be presented, which will be obliging, and that's that.
Thank you. Mr. Kuzmierczak, you're next on the list on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr.
You probably
Chair.
put yourself
Again,
on about 8 hours ago on the list.
Yeah, exactly, when it began 8 hours ago. No, I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to say that, again, we're interested in facts, and we've said it from the very beginning that there are 2,500 full-time jobs at the battery plant, building batteries that are going to local Canadian and unionized workers, 2,500 full-time permanent jobs at the battery plant. We know that there will be up to 2,300 construction jobs building the battery plant. Those will go to local Canadian workers. And we also know that in terms of installing the equipment, we know that close to 50% of the jobs for installation of equipment will also be going to local Canadian workers. Those are the facts, and we're interested in establishing and sharing those facts and supporting those facts with Canadians because this is good news. It's not just good news for Windsor. It's very good news for other areas that have landed a battery plant thanks to federal leadership, whether it's the Umicore battery plant in Kingston, whether it is the Northvolt battery plant in Montreal, whether it's the battery plant in BC. We are eager to share the good news about the thousands of jobs that are being created in those communities. At the same time, we've already, in the industry committee, we've already stated that we are interested in making sure that the information about the contracts is shared with MPs. We voted for that. There's 6 studies that are being conducted at the industry committee to study those investments. And again, like I said, our interest is to make sure that facts, that information is being shared with Canadians, because again, these are investments that are changing the future for communities like ours, communities that again 8 years ago under the Conservatives had 11.2% unemployment. And today we have workers working, and we have 2,500 jobs, permanent jobs, coming to communities like mine. And so, just wanted to say, at the same time, we also want to balance the information in the contracts, balance it with the fact that we don't want to put these investments at risk. We know that there's commercially sensitive information in those contracts. We want to make sure that we don't risk the current agreements, the current investments, but also future investments that we know are on our doorstep. In the case of Windsor, we know that there's billions of dollars on our doorstep, suppliers that want to locate in Windsor. They want to supply the battery plant. We just want to make sure we're not taking any false steps that puts those additional investments in jeopardy. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmierczak. Now we have the other half of Windsor. Mr. Massey, welcome. Welcome back to OGGO.
Thanks.
Go ahead, please.
Repeat offender, I suppose. Yeah, no, thanks. And I appreciate the committee and the work they're doing this. We've had a couple of our members here that are from industry committee, and I listened as I did another committee at the same time this morning. So I appreciate the hours that the committee's put in and coming back here. So I'm going to be direct, because I think it's the best way to deal with this, is that I came here tonight with trying to hopefully get answers for the public here the best that we can, and a number of different things I intend to do tonight. Is we don't support G and H because we don't support concurrence motions in the House that'll cause problems. We do support, though, making sure the government is going to follow through with this commitment. And I would be, a little bit concerned hearing that there might be an amendment about translation later on. But I know that would be pertinent for documents to be translated sooner rather than later. But maybe 1 week is too much, but we'll see. I just hope that there wouldn't be any issues with that. And as well, too, I'll tell you this much. Tonight I won't be supporting some of the preamble language that proposed to me and seeing the amendments by both the Conservative and Liberal Party. The reason being is because it's just basically opinion as to what's out there. What I want to try to do is try to find some more of the facts here, restore public confidence to these investments that are taking place, but I believe that we need to try to be as transparent as possible. I'm also concerned, and I do have an amendment at some time to work through it, if I can, with hopefully finding consensus like we did in Industry Committee, about how we can actually get the actual information of the foreign workers that are coming, the foreign workers that will operate the plant, and also the specific foreign workers who will be doing the training of the Canadian workers and for how long. But also, too, is if there is a way to protect proprietary information, but also done in a way that can be trustworthy, because I worry about that. I have handing all that over to companies in the government. So I'm trying to find a way to do all of those things. And I know there's other amendments coming. But to be clear, we won't support G and H at this particular point. But I take the reservation that the Conservatives have about it to sincerely, like whether they're not going to get the information or not. I believe that we can under H. And I believe there will be a political will to do so, because I can tell you that the companies that are all being noted in this thing right here don't want a story to continue to go on and on and on in perpetuity. So I think that the government will be understanding of that, because if they don't produce these documents as soon as possible, it's going to continue to undermine public confidence in the materials here. So I will be supporting the motion to remove G and H, but I have high expectations that they're going to be deliverable in terms of the rest of the motion, and I will be voting against much of, like I did at Industry Committee, getting rid of the preamble of this just to get to the contracts. And I'm searching for ways to actually try to bring some consensus to the fact that we do want as much information as possible, and not turning over the entire keys of the operation for redaction to the companies and the government unilaterally. So I'm working on those elements to see if I can find a way as we go through this day. But again, we won't be supporting G and H in this particular time.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Well, that exhausts our speaking list on Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment. Ready to go to a recorded vote on this, colleagues?
The vote is on the amendment of Mr. Kuzmierczuk to remove subparagraphs G and H.
Monsieur le Président, est-ce qu'on pourrait voter?
Mr. Chair, could we vote one by one on each of the paragraphs? Because they are two different amendments. To withdraw G and H.
We'll have.
Ah ouais.
Yeah, so it's just we're voting on the amendment, which was to delete G and H.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Johari.
Support.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Jennis.
No.
Mr. McGuire.
No.
Mr. Perkins.
No.
Monsieur Fortin.
No.
Mr. Massey.
Oui.
So that is 6 yeas, 4 nays.
Okay, motion carries then. Deletion of G and H. And we're back to the original motion without G and H. We have starting a speaking list. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I live in hope that the government will live up to the words that they've said, which is open transparency. And I'm not surprised that there seems to be some confusion amongst the Liberal members about what actually is being seen at the Industry Committee, since the Industry Committee is not seeing public documents. It's a secret process, a secret, hidden process, which tries to ensure that members are unable to ask questions once they see the contracts about what's in them. And I can tell you, having read the Volkswagen contract, I can tell you what's not in. What's not in them is a commitment to Canadian jobs, contrary to what the Liberal members say. That contract has no commitment to hiring Canadian jobs. I can also tell you what else isn't in it. What else isn't in it is a power of the government to redact the contract on request of it being public. Those are facts. Those aren't in the contract. And since the minister has said these mirror each other, we know that that's the case in Stellantis. Why would anyone want to presuppose what should be released by picking and choosing on contracts, which most members here have not seen, picking and choosing which clauses should be public? They don't know what clauses should be public because they haven't seen the contract. So there are provisions in most normal commercial contracts with the government that allow, when you're getting taxpayer money, particularly in this case more than $15 billion of taxpayer money, $1,000 a household, that you expect when you're doing business with the Government of Canada, the elements of your contracts will be open and transparent. That's part of doing business. If you don't want to do that business, then don't take taxpayer money. If you want to be secret and hiding from what you're trying to do. The question here before us in this main motion is that we have a motion that simply asks for transparency. The government has said, and I just came from questioning the Minister of Industry in the Finance Committee on this contract. And the Minister of Industry, when I asked him if he read the contract, gave a Bernadette Jordan type answer. You remember Bernadette, the former Fisheries Minister, Bernadette Jordan, who I beat. She was asked if she read the Marshall decision, pretty fundamental thing on the fishery, and she said no before committee. You know what the minister said? I've been apprised of it. I've been kept informed about what's in the contract. So the minister, a corporate lawyer, has the department approve a $15 billion contract, which he hasn't read. And obviously that's why he's confused, because the ambassador from South Korea says there's 1,600 South Korean jobs or people from South Korea coming as foreign replacement workers that are going to be coming, and they need housing. That's why he met with everybody. But at the same time, this minister has said only a couple of days ago, oh, there's only a few jobs, contradicting the South Korean ambassador, who I don't think was freelancing. And then we had another minister, the Minister of Natural Resources, saying in Twitter last Thursday, oh, of course there's foreign workers coming from South Korea. And we've had the company, in the space of a week, give out 3 or 4 different numbers about what's coming. Is it 900? Is it 600? Is it 1,600? Every day they seem to give out a different number. And this has gotten so bad, and our motion mentions the 4 contracts, the Volkswagen contract, the Nexstar, which is the Stellantis contract, the Ford contract in the Bloc Québécois leaders riding with Ford, which is with a Swedish company. And guess what they said on the weekend when they were asked what's going on? They said, guess what? We're bringing in foreign workers. Because, of course, that contract mirrors the Volkswagen contract, which I've seen, and the Stellantis contract, which clearly don't have a provision that prohibits foreign workers and actually allows for it and does not require Canadian workers as the only thing. Now, the government disputes this. I've asked questions in question period, and the minister talks about the amount of money the companies are putting in and some fairy dust thing about 300,000 jobs in Ontario from a report from Trillium. Trillium, if you search it, and I engaged MP Souza, MP Baines, come back and find the word VW in the Trillium contract. It doesn't appear. Find the word Stellantis in the Trillium contract. It doesn't appear. Yet the minister fancies himself as some guy who's creating 300,000 jobs in this industry if you sprinkle fairy dust here. In fact, when the parliamentary budget officer was before the committee on his estimates, he said the 5-year payback, which the minister said in the House, is 20 years. And I said, well, really, if you take the Volkswagen contract alone or the Stellantis contract alone, and you take the number of jobs if they were Canadian, and if they were paying Canadian taxes at the average wage of $100,000, it would actually take 150 years for that $15 billion to be paid back to taxpayers. I don't think we'll be buying lithium batteries 150 years from now in EVs. I don't think we'll be buying them 10 years from now in EVs, as this government has decided to invest in the Betamax of batteries. And so when you go forward on this, and say, what are they hiding? Well, what the government's trying to hide, clearly, is transparency. If they believed that that contract meant Canadian jobs only, they'd be rushing that contract out publicly to say, you guys are wrong. See, we're telling you they're wrong because we've released it. The jobs in the Bloc Québécois leaders riding, the jobs in the members for Windsor's riding, the jobs in St. Thomas, Ontario, they clearly are not required to hire Canadians only. The government members say, we're going to get all the information. How? The only way to get all the information is to release the contract. And for anyone around here to assume that they know what's in the contract, so I'll just ask for one line in the contract, a contract which you haven't seen. You don't know all the provisions of every clause of a 20 or 30 or 40-page contract. Hopefully a $15 billion contract's more than 20 pages, but, you know, I can tell you, you'd be disappointed if you read the Volkswagen contract to see it much longer than that. So in the case of this, the IRA, the minister has made it public, this mirrors the IRA. The IRA, if you've read it on the provisions part, says very clearly what the IRA does. 100% of the cost of developing a battery between now and 2029 is covered by the taxpayer. 75% the year after, 50% the year after that, 25% the year after that. That's in the clause in the IRA. The Parliamentary Budget Officer at committee confirmed that the contracts mirror that provision. So we're talking about massive government subsidies that are paying 100% of what is 40% of the cost of an electronic vehicle, so that batteries made with parts from China, where over 80% of the cathodes and anodes and the parts for EV batteries are made, they're not made in Canada, get assembled, not manufactured, in Quebec and in Ontario, and shipped to the United States to be assembled in vehicles in the United States and sold in the United States. $15 billion in Stellantis, another $15 billion of Volkswagen, of taxpayer money for foreign replacement workers to work in those plants, to pay taxes back home in South Korea, so that batteries can be shipped to the United States and sold in the United States. We're using Canadian taxpayer subsidies to subsidize the profits of global multinationals so that cars can be sold in the United States. If anyone's going to get the discount because of that, which I doubt Volkswagen and Stellantis will pass on a discount, it'll be the Americans, not Canadians. Meanwhile, all the employee taxes, or 3/4 of them, are going to go off to the foreign replacement workers that are being brought in by Stellantis and by the Swedish company that is partnering in this. So if you have confidence, which you espouse and project and say you have, then put your money where your mouth is and release the contracts. If you won't do that, you're clearly hiding something, because you know what you're hiding? The fact that there aren't Canadian job guarantees in this contract, and that Stellantis is free to do exactly what it is they sent their South Korean ambassador to Canada to do, which is to bring in 1,600 people from Korea to work in that plant out of the 2,500 jobs. Some bargain, and the minister said he hasn't even read the contract when I asked him less than an hour ago. He knows the elements of the contract. He's too busy getting his aeroplan points around the world and doing his salesmanship and trying to generate his media for his leadership bid than he is to actually read a contract. I thought the guy was a corporate lawyer and actually understood that you don't sign a contract without reading it. And certainly not a contract that spends $15 billion, the biggest subsidy ever to a single company. It's not even a Canadian company. And if you think these things are working and you don't believe me, let's look at the Kami plant, opened in Barrie in the spring. Prime Minister is there, the Minister of Industry is there. Isn't that wonderful? We got the full first EV car assembly plant in Canada. Wonderful, big deal, lots of press conference, lots of great local jobs. You know how many jobs are at that plant right now? 0. It was shut down 2 months ago after only 6 months of operation because they can't get any parts. Because you know where the parts come from? China. And China won't send the parts. So this strategy is a failure no matter what the minister says. And he doesn't want it exposed. He doesn't want the contracts released because he is afraid. He's afraid to show that the fact is he screwed up and he didn't put Canadian jobs first. He didn't put Canadian union jobs first. He said that this was to save the auto industry. The only jobs he's saving are for 1,600 people from South Korea that are coming here from that province. They're not immigrants. They're not temporary foreign workers. So it's a load of you-know-what for everyone that's watching that says that these guys believe in Canadian jobs and Canadian union jobs. And any MP in this committee that fights the release of these public contracts is an accomplice in the cover-up of this Liberal government who is trying to cover up their failures and putting together a proper contract that protects Canadian jobs. That's what they're afraid of. And if you vote to do anything other then release the entire contract under the terms of that contract. There are commercial provisions in there, but under the terms, and let the contract dictate what can go out, then you are assisting this government in covering up the truth on the jobs. And mark my words, when there are 1,600 South Koreans here, when there are 1,600 or 1,000 Swedish workers here in the Ford plant in Quebec, when Volkswagen, by the way, I can tell you another thing that's not in the contract, any commitment that's required after the government subsidy ends in 2032. There is zero commitment after spending $15 billion. It's not in the contract. It's not in the contract. You would think it would be in there, but of course it's not in the contract because the minister didn't read the contract. So probably nobody in the cabinet read the contract. And I'm certain that none of the MPs opposite with their speaking notes from the Ministry of Industry didn't read the contract. And I can tell you that putting it in this little secret chamber, a secret chamber in a little room where you can't bring in a notepad, where you have to lock your phones outside, where you're allowed to read it. Believe me, I spent 6 hours reading the Volkswagen contract. I read it many times. By the way, there's two, in case you're wondering. There's two for each of these. There's a CIF contract, that's the industry CIV program that spends billions of dollars. So there's a CIF contract. That's, in the case of Volkswagen, that's $778 million going to build the plant of taxpayer money, and $500 million in Stellantis' case out of the CIF contract. Then there is the production subsidy contract. That's the one where they are subsidizing 100% of the cost of the battery. That is what this Liberal government thinks is a great deal. An industry that can only survive if Canadian taxpayers pay 100% of the cost of the battery. 100% of the cost. No wonder they don't want the contracts public. No wonder they don't want them public. They'll be too embarrassed that they were taken to the cleaners by these foreign multinationals for not doing their homework. So it's time that members of Parliament who have had enough of the story which changes every day from Nexstar about how many foreign workers are bringing in, the story that changes from this government, the minister from Edmonton who said there's only one coming. He said it in the House. Then the minister in industry said there's only a couple. Then the minister of natural resources who tweeted and said, well, actually, there's lots coming. There's lots coming, and it's all Harper's fault, is what he said in his tweet. Yes, it's a terrible thing that we signed free trade deals, and it's Harper's fault that this government doesn't know how to negotiate a contract and doesn't know how to protect Canadian jobs in a contract. So the time has come for all of those who care about the transparency and care about ensuring that all the jobs in Windsor, in St. Thomas, and in the two plants in Quebec go to Canadians, go to Quebecers, don't go to foreign nationals who will take all that pay home. It's time for you to show some courage and ask for these contracts to be made public. Anything less than that is a failure by every member of Parliament here who will be complicit in the cover-up.
Thanks, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Massey, and then Mr. Sousa, and then Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the important things that has put us in this situation that is missed is our auto strategy has been basically defined by the United States under the Inflation Reduction Act. And, you know, that's the so-called free market friends that we have, and exposes some of our trade dilemmas, and also, too, shows the massive intervention that's done by the United States. So as New Democrats, for years, we've been calling for a national auto strategy, one that is actually going to be planned and actually measured on the jobs and hours that we receive from workers. And this is the problem that we have with this situation right now. Quite frankly, when it came to light, you know, there was one job that was actually applied for under the Labor Market Adjustment Program. But the reality is what has slipped through, I think, a lot of the different discussion at the time was that the contracts, we don't know, because the member just outlined as we really don't know, didn't really provide the public with the proper information, and it's been a moving target ever since. On Monday it was 1, on Tuesday it was 100, on the next few days it changed from basically 1,500 to I think 900 now, and maybe potentially could be up to 1,000. It's hard to know because we don't know. And that's a public expectation, is where the dollars could actually go. The industry itself has had a long history with regards to having government intervention. In fact, quite frankly, I want to touch a couple things that took place. First of all, back in 1985, it was Chrysler that was then rescued at that time with Lee Iacocca and so forth and others that actually saved the plant, and there was massive public input into that. And then it actually, when we held on to the shares, it actually turned a return profit to the actual taxpayers. And most recently, we went through a tough time with regards to General Motors and Ford. And if you remember, the late Jim Flaherty said, we can't pick winners or losers. And to his credit, this is not to his detriment. He actually switched his position later on and did an investment into General Motors. Now, unfortunately, the government at the day, under Harper, did sell the shares and shortchanged us in terms of that investment. Otherwise, it would have paid for bigger dividends. But the ending there was that there was an intervention into the actual market at that time. And again, this is not to denigrate Mr. Flaherty. It's actually to congratulate him for changing his position, which was very public at that time. I'm a little bit concerned with some of the stuff for proprietary information, but I'm more concerned with the fact that we still have a moving target here when it comes to actually the contracts themselves. And I don't support and didn't support at Industry Committee going into the secret chamber to actually get the information for that deal, because I know that the uncertainty and the question marks remain the biggest inhibitor when it comes to actually investment and confidence of the public. There is some legitimate, I think, concern about the investment and that some of these things with the Canadian Bills Trades Union has actually raised, and that's where a lot of this came from, is that there was some expectation that perhaps there would be some intervention. I don't think we've ever seen this intervention with foreign labor coming in to actually retool a plant. Usually this happens in the tool and die mold making industry, where actually workers go back and forth along the border. In fact, we've had trouble over the past number of years with actually getting access to fixed machinery and so forth. So some of this stuff does take place. I'm worried a little bit with regards to the contractual elements when it comes to suppliers and so forth, and that's led to some of the challenges that we have. Now, when it comes to the motion here, I don't support the prelude to the motion. And similar to industry, I'm hoping that we take that out. And I don't want to see us spend all night with a replacement by the Liberals with other type of hyperbole with regards to it. I would hope that we get to the essence of it. I think that I'd like to hear more discussion in terms of how we ensure proprietary information. I think that the commercial provisions that are in the contracts do provide some protection, as the member has outlined. My concern really resides in understanding the number of jobs and foreign workers that are coming into the plant, those that are training, and then those that are on top of that that are actually staying in the community. What is important for my community in terms of how it plays out to the rest of the country is how communities plan. So when we don't even know these targets, we have right now a housing shortage like many communities across Canada. And so there is some activity going on to take place to take care of that, but there's no social planning when it comes to actually making sure that these investments include perhaps even long-term investments that actually provide social housing once the workers return home. I know for a fact that I've been contacted by our local downtown businesses, and they have no hotel rooms whatsoever, and we have people coming into our country, and if they are going to be provided and they are intended to come, we don't want conditions that are also going to create social strife and conflict. And I worry about that in terms of the terminology that's been used in this discussion, because the reality is that if some of these people are coming to take advantage of the situation, a job opportunity exists there by no fault of their own, they come into an environment that's already polarized. So my intent in all of this is to make sure that the rest of the communities that actually face this subsequently actually can use this to an advantage. And perhaps there still is time in this equation. After 18 months of doing nothing to train workers, perhaps there's a way to actually train some of the workers in the Windsor-Essex region, including perhaps some of the other regions that could come down to actually provide some of those job skill sets that would then be valuable for the other places later on. So this is what I'm trying to figure out, how to do these things and also to restore public confidence in it. I am not complicit with, listen, we don't normally in this place release contracts to different government deals. I've been here for 21 years, and this is not the normal procedure. And yes, thank you, and I won't take much more time, so it's not another 22 years till I finish. But I do want to say that I appreciate the list that's been provided here in the motion. I think it's the comprehensive list that's necessary to get us to the next stage. I still worry about, and I'm looking forward to the debate about any proprietary information and elements like that that could actually create some further complications. But at the same time, I think right now we need to move on with making sure that this situation that we're taking place right here can be used to the benefit of the other places that are going to get investment afterwards. The contracts are sold and will stay, and they're on their merit on themselves, whether there'll be a value or not, and whether they be carried out. So again, I'll conclude with this in terms of I'm hoping that perhaps there'll be some way to at least start with this discussion is to delete that point 1 through point 3, and I will not entertain any other Liberal amendment to try to put any type of other hyperbole back into this equation for it. That's what we did at Industry Committee, so I'd make a motion to at one point, when it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, to delete numbers 1, 2, and 3 into the motion to get right to the thrust of it, and I will not entertain other substance that would be put into that from anybody else, because I believe that we want to talk about the real issue here, and it's really about how we get a fair balance about the contracts, getting them public. And I do not want these contracts, again, Mr. Speaker, to go, Mr. Chair, to go to a room somewhere where then it also handcuffs members of Parliament and will create a longer story in the longer run, because it won't solve the situation. Otherwise, we're going to be back up here, and I don't want to be back up here.
Right. Before we get to Mr. Sousa, Mr. Massey, when you were talking about your proposed motion down the road, I did see a bunch of heads nodding. Perhaps if we are in agreement to zap 1, 2, and 3, we can have Mr. Massey move it as a formal motion.
Okay.
Just a quick point of order, Chair. I would assume that the words "given that" would be removed as well, so it just reads that an order do issue for the production, et cetera. I assume that's okay.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Perfect.
And I would make a formal motion that we subtract that.
Perfect.
Mr. Chair,
So
if there's
we'll-
consensus. With the clear understanding that I do not want to see substitutions of the equivalency put into the.
Perfect. So
From anyone
Mr.
else.
Massey's motion will be to delete that, given that, and then points 1, 2, and 3, we seem to have consent for, well, on division. We'll do it on division. But we can move forward. Thanks, Mr. Massey. Mr. Sousa, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate the comments made by Mr. Massey in regards to this issue. And it's important for us to recognize the importance of this investment to the industry, and to the point being made by all of you, we recognize the importance of this to Canada's vitality and economic prosperity and engagement to creating jobs. And certainly Ontario and Canada in the auto sector, it's a prominent industry, and we have done much over the years, over multiple different governments, to invest and support it. And that's what this is about, to continue to support this investment and secure Canada's position as we go forward. We are an attractive destination for foreign direct investment, and we have been, and we want it to continue to be so, because we are competing against other jurisdictions around the world for this issue. So the matter being proposed through this motion puts in jeopardy some of the very issues and the nature of these contracts. I heard recently one of the members talking about this as though it was a private sector, and there's shareholders, of which now is the public because of taxpayer dollars engagement. But even in a private sector or even a public company, the shareholders are apprised of the generalities of the investment, but not the sensitivities, the competitive nature of those investments. That's restricted to the board and the executive, for fear, of course, that you have a competitive industry with other players and stakeholders involved. And so I find it ironic that now we're talking about foreign direct investments and the issues of South Korea when the very trade agreement was in place by Stephen Harper prior. So now they're contradicting that, just as they've contradicted the Ukrainian free trade agreement that was just proposed. It's as though they're not into free trade agreements and they're not into enabling Canada's competitiveness as we go forward, which I find it's interesting. But Canadians do the same thing with other countries and other investments. Take CANDU reactors in the past, right? So we foster the investment, we enable Canada to compete in other parts of the world, and we brought forward certain expertise by which we use them to construct the nature of those factories and production facilities. In this case, there's been some inflation and some misinformation, and I appreciate that we need to get to the bottom of it by way of reviewing those contracts. But we are talking about the production of permanent jobs here in Canada by Canadians. and by investing in the skills that are necessary to compete in this new EV strategy and production facilities. So, and of course, like every contract that some have discussed, there are performance measures and trigger points by which to enable. So when we look at a production or a plant that may have not proceeded, it didn't mean the monies were invested by Canadians at that point. It means they didn't meet their measures at that point. And there are measures in place. The monies that are going into this plant are from Stellantis. That's the initial investments are theirs first. Canada comes in a second position, at a second phase. And of course, when you look at the duplication of some of these requests, I mean, we have other committees that are also reviewing or wishing to review, and I think it'd be important for us to engage with them in order for this body, us here in this committee, to have a better understanding of what's in those trade agreements without, of course, exposing those companies who themselves are nervous about other competitors being aware of their deals. And nor are their shareholders aware of the particulars of those deals, because that would be inappropriate as well. However, the interests of Canadians, the interests of our economy, the interests of creating jobs permanently in Canada are at the forefront of everything we do. And I'm kind of shocked at the way this is being developed by the opposition, because had we not done the deal, we would have been accused of not being at the table. We would have been accused of letting the Americans take it over. We would have been accused of not being competitive, and Canada is not an attractive place to do business. And where, in fact, we are. And proprietary information and patents, that also has to be secured. We need to secure our position in that regard as well. And all in all, it's as though they don't want to be part of the EV strategy. I mean, the whole world is going to this direction. And if we want to sit back and let it go beyond us and put our heads in the sand, as the opposition seems to be proposing, then we'll be left behind and Canadians will lose. We are fighting hard to ensure that we're at the forefront of economic development. So I support Mr. Massey's idea and notion of eliminating the preamble and initiating some purpose by which we allow our members here in this committee and others to review the contract in greater detail and to have confidence in what is being said without jeopardizing the confidentiality of these deals and without jeopardizing Canada's ability to then continue to attract foreign direct investment. Or we'll be seen as a banana republic who is not there to protect the interests of these deals. And that is what the opposition is trying to suggest, putting Canadians at risk. Not really fighting for Canada, but instead fighting for their YouTube hits, and they're enabling themselves to look like stars and not looking at the interests of Canadians as we are doing here. So I support the notion of providing the information as being requested, but doing so in a way that protects the information without being exposed to competitive nature and other jurisdictions that will then take advantage of what we're doing here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thanks, Mr. Sousa. Mr. Kuzmierczak, over to you, please. Then Mr. Garnett and Ms. Vignola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to say thank you to my colleague from Windsor West for really bringing forward a thoughtful motion here, a change to an amendment that eliminates a lot of the disinformation and misinformation and the politics and the games. And that really was my primary concern, that we keep the games and the politics and the misinformation about this important discussion that we're having about these investments. So I just wanted to say thank you to my colleague from down the street from Windsor West. I want to sing from the rooftops the story of investment in Canada in electric vehicles and battery plants and electric vehicles. This is such a great story that I can't wait to share with Canadians. You look at the last 3 years, of investments, $30 billion of investments. The Stellantis battery plant, which is the first battery plant in Canada, is but the first battery plant and the first major investment, $5 billion. You look at the Volkswagen investment, just up the 401 in St. Thomas, $7 billion, more than 5,000 jobs created. Northvolt, which is a Swedish company investing in Montreal, $7 billion, 3,000 jobs. Umicore, again, close to $3 billion investment, 1,000 jobs in Kingston. GM POSCO, again, a $600 million investment in Quebec. You look at, again, General Motors in Oshawa, $1.82 billion, 1,000 jobs. Honda in Alliston, $1.35 billion. Ford in Oakville, $1.84 billion. Mr. Chair, $30 billion plus in investment in automotive in just the last 3 years. Tens of thousands of jobs, not just in Windsor, but up and down the 401, Ontario, Quebec, Maple Ridge, British Columbia, all across the country. This is what happens when you have a federal government making big investment, partnering with workers, partnering with industry. This is what happens. And I get that the Conservatives want to cast shade on this good news story. They want to cast shade and doubt, and I get it, because they don't want to remind Canadians that when they were in government, they lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs in Canada. When the Conservatives were in power, they let 300,000 manufacturing jobs walk out of our country. 300,000. And
sorry, we just have a point of order, Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Perkins.
We expected this, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we'll get to it when we get back to you.
Yeah,
Relevance to the motion.
You let me talk this long.
Relevance to the motion.
Yeah, I'm surprised too.
He's just asking relevance. We, of course, always allow a wide
Talking about the
degree of speaking on a topic, but I'm sure Mr. Kuzmierczuk will get a bit back closer to the motion at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll get back to I'll get back closer to home. So we felt that devastation. We felt that devastation in Windsor when the Conservatives were in power in 2015. We had 11.2% unemployment in our community, 11.2% in our community unemployment, and we remember those days. And we know that the leader of the opposition, the current leader of the Conservative opposition, was the Minister of Employment at the time. Of course, we refer to him as the Minister of Unemployment in Windsor. But we have now a battery plant here. We have a battery plant here, Mr. Chair, that is creating 2,500 permanent jobs in my community. This is our great hope. This is our great future. This is our community's great rebound. Windsor is the comeback story of Canada, and it is because we're making these major investments here. And so I will sing from the rooftops and shout from the rooftops the good news about the $30 billion of investment this federal government has delivered for Canadians and in manufacturing communities from coast to coast to coast. We will continue to deliver investments for Canadians, and the Conservatives can keep giving words, and casting shade and casting doubt. We'll keep delivering, and that's what we'll do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmierczuk. Mr. Genuis.
I'll strike.
Okay.
Reputation would be unnecessary.
Mrs. Vignola, please go ahead.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you also for your patience as I came back here. Well, listen, I'm a woman of consensus. I try to find what can be a nexus between what we are seeking, or what are we seeking to achieve as an objective. And to that end, I have an amendment to propose that may meet the needs to learn what are the agreements on workers that are here in Canada or overseas, concerning all of the human resources clauses that may contain that the contracts may contain. And the amendment will be sent to you shortly, I believe. I have the English version. I will read it. So now I understand that the first paragraph, instead of having the first 3 points, we say that an order do issue for the production of copies. And I would add, of the text of any provisions relating to the hiring or use of foreign workers or concerning language requirements and language of work included in any contract, memorandum of understanding, or any other agreement between any minister, department. So I will focus the original motion on essentially what we are seeking, which is the human resources, the foreign workers, and the language requirements of those workers. It is a point that I believe will allow us to obtain the answers to the questions we are asking, that will allow us, I hope, to obtain consensus. I have not gone around the table because I just arrived, but it is, in my humble opinion, something that may obtain a consensus and would allow us to seek the answers that we are seeking about the hiring of foreign workers. Because what is important, I understand that when Canada builds factories overseas, we have Canadian companies that go work in those factories. It is a practice that is common. However, as I said this morning, I have never seen 1,600 Canadian workers go help out to build a factory overseas. We'll see a few engineers, a few technicians and electricians, but never 1,600 people. And that is why it is important to look at the human resources clauses that the contracts contain. And by having access to those clauses in particular, because they are the ones that all of our discussions have dealt with since this morning, we would also allow other committees to do their work on the points that concern them, whether it's concerning technology, skills, etc. We would focus on the aspect raised since this morning, that is human resources in the contracts. So that is the amendment that I wanted to make. I imagine, Mr. Chair, that everyone has it now.
Just point over, Chair. My understanding is this has not been distributed. I haven't received it. I wonder if we could just suspend before the.
Yeah, we have received it. We're just that just needs to tweak some translation issues. So just bear with for a few seconds.
I know, but we don't want this to pass. What? We don't want this to pass. That's why
I started a speaking list already. I have on the amendment. I have Mr. Perkins, Mr. Genuis, and then Mr. Scheer. The amendment's just going out now. We've got 4 people on the speaking list. We could probably start with Mr. Perkins on the amendment, unless you wish to wait to have everyone receive it.
Yeah, can we have the amendment because we
Okay.
might want to take a suspend for about a couple of minutes to read it.
It's a very simple one. She read it into the record, but it'll come out right now. Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Perkins?
Mr. Chair, and thank you for proposing to try and find a way through this. But I appreciate the intent, but I can't support it, and I can't support it for the following reasons. Earlier, I had mentioned that I'm just looking around the table. I'm the only one here that's actually read the Volkswagen contract. And As I said, the minister said that these are mirrored contracts, that they're based on the IRA and have similar terms. And of course, we know Stellantis threatened to leave because their initial construction announcement happened before the IRA, right? Was brought in. Then the IRA happened. The President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act happened, which contained EV battery production subsidies. And so the Volkswagen contract was negotiated in the context post-IRA, where the Stellantis original contract was done in the context pre that. And as a result, quite rightly so, I think, Stellantis said, hey, guys, we're not on a level playing field here. You can't be saying that we don't get that similar treatment when Volkswagen's getting it, and if we go to the U.S., we'll get that treatment. But if we stay here, we won't get it, and everyone who goes to the U.S. can get it, and everyone who and Volkswagen will get it here. So with that in mind, you know, it put the construction at bay. While the mirror agreement, or the agreement that's similar, because I'm assuming, based on the numbers, the production numbers, the PBO report, that it's similar. And I just want to go over and say I am gonna say one thing about what's in the VW contract, about the issue of public release. The VW contract says that the contract can be released publicly. But before it gets released publicly, the government must seek VW's consent to protect only the things that are commercially sensitive to Volkswagen. There's no ability of the government to redact the things that they think are politically sensitive, like, say, the section around the lack of commitment to Canadian jobs. They can't exempt that out of some political narrative. In the Volkswagen contract, it says only the company can, and they can only do it for commercially sensitive reasons. And there were 3 sections redacted when we saw it. It was a section on the number of batteries to be produced every year, but, you know, it wasn't difficult to figure out. And the construction contract, for some strange reason, of the plant was redacted, and they thought that was commercially sensitive. But Volkswagen, knowing that a bunch of politicians were going to be looking at this contract, didn't redact the sections around jobs, didn't redact the sections around the out clauses to meet those commitments on the jobs, didn't redact the section around establishing a battery recycling ecosystem. None of those things were redacted by Volkswagen. All that was redacted was the annual production number that they said was an average. That's the same contract that the parliamentary budget officer looked at and wrote 2 reports on. One of them, he has actually, I believe, seen the Stellantis contract as well. And so he confirmed when we had him before committee that it was basically the same. So the problem here is that the Bloc is trying to pick out of the contract the things that they think need to be released on a contract they haven't seen. And I don't think that's the role of parliamentarians. I don't think it's the role of the opposition. I don't think it's the role of the government. It's certainly not the role of the government in the terms of the contract. And it's not the role of the Bloc to determine what clause that they, to a contract they haven't seen, gets released on the contract subsidizing the Northvolt Ford, a Swedish company, foreign worker, replacement worker in the Bloc Québécois leader's riding. Apparently, they don't want to see the terms that make sure that they get, because employment contracts can be in one spot, they can be in another. And by the way, again, there are 2 contracts. There's not one. There's 2 for each of these. So we have to make sure that people understand that. It's both the construction contract in the Strategic Investment Fund of ISED that pays for the government subsidy on the government subsidy on the construction, and then there's the production subsidy contract. And both have job commitments. Job commitments for construction, job commitments for permanent jobs. And they're identical, I suspect. And they're probably identical in the fact that they don't mention the word Canadian job. So otherwise, they'd be releasing it. So there are other sections that deal in these two contracts with employment and other terms and clauses. If you don't ask for the right clauses, you will not find all the outs that are in the contract that allow the commercial company, the auto company, to actually get out of those job commitments if you don't ask for the right stuff. And I can tell you from the block motion, they aren't asking for the right stuff to get to the bottom of whether or not the Bloc Québécois leaders riding will be inundated with Swedish workers, which the company, by the way, I'll read to you from the Saturday article that came out on Radio Canada, which said where the company said, let me find the right article. There's just so many articles with so many conflicting job numbers from conflicting people from the government through the proponents. They said in this article, which came out on November 24th, they said that the owners from said, for the Quebec project, the Swedish company says that it's too early to be able to quantify the number of experts we will need precisely, but to give an order of magnitude, it will be a few hundred people. So you can guarantee that in the Bloc Québécois leaders riding, there's going to be at least a few hundred foreign replacement workers in his riding, not jobs for Quebecers. You can expect the same at the not only the St. Thomas plant and the Windsor plants. As we know, 1,600 workers from South Korea. And by the way, the second plant in Quebec, guess who the partner company on that is? It's a Korean company. It's a Korean company. So you can expect Swedish workers and you can expect foreign replacement workers in both those Quebec plants from Sweden and from South Korea, the same the way they've done it. So anyway, I would say going forward that trying to ask for one particular thing out of a complex contract won't get you to where you want. Let the company, as they have the power, decide what is commercially sensitive to them, not to the government. Let them choose, as is the term of the contract, what is sensitive to them. Who are we to choose what is sensitive for Stellantis or Nextars or subsidiaries here, or for Northvolt or for Volkswagen? So I think with MP Massey's addition and the vote, obviously, that was made, I personally still, obviously, I'm not going to rehash G&H because we know that the government ignored this committee's document production requirements for the McKinsey reports. I have no confidence that they're going to do it again here, aren't going to do it again here, and that's why we need to ask for the release of the whole contract, because you don't know what to ask for if you are trying to narrow it down, and let the company decide what is sensitive as the terms of the contract enable them to do, not the government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Perkins, Mr. Genuis, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I begin, I wonder if you could share the existing speaking list with us.
On the amendment, it's yourself, Mr. Scheer, and then Mrs. Vignola.
Okay.
On the amendment.
Okay.
Yeah. On the amendment, would you like to be added to the list for the amendment? You were on the speaking list for the original motion, not the amendment.
I suspect, based on past precedent, he will go far beyond the amendment as well, Chair. That may be the source of the confusion from the member opposite. Look, Chair, Conservatives want to get this complete, and we want to get the contracts. We believe that the public is a simple proposition. The public is paying for the public is paying for this. The public should, generally speaking, have access to the contracts. The block amendment, I hope the block might reconsider it, because it really vandalizes the whole project as far as I'm concerned. Because with a relatively small number of words, it changes the whole meaning of what we're doing here. Instead of asking for the contracts such that we could look at the contracts and understand them and get to the bottom of their implications in the fullest sense, it moves us towards requesting a narrow set of provisions that specifically name certain things that relate to hiring or foreign workers or language requirements, language of work. There may be aspects of these contracts that have an impact on those things, but do not specifically touch on the criteria that were mentioned. I think it is reasonable to look at the whole contract to be able to understand what the effects of the contracts are in totality in terms of Canadian workers. That's what we're trying to establish. We know that this public subsidy is leading to the employment of hundreds, at least, of foreign replacement workers. And getting to the bottom of this requires not just looking at provisions that might specifically mention foreign replacement workers. I'm not an expert in this area like my colleague, Mr. Perkins, is, but I suspect that they didn't write directly into the contracts, we will take X number of replacement workers. I suspect that the government, foreseeing this possibility, was cryptic enough in their language, or simply didn't insert the necessary protections to ensure Canadian workers were involved. So it may not be so much a question of what's in the contract, but what's not in the contract. But we can only establish conclusions based on what's not in the contract if we see the whole contract. If we see the whole contract, then we can say, well, there's nothing in the contract that provides for X, Y, and Z. But if we only see part of a contract, we have no way of establishing that. We have no way of establishing what's not in the contract unless we see the whole contract. I think that follows fairly clearly and fairly logically. We have no way of establishing what's not in the contract unless we first see the whole contract, so we can identify what's absent. If you only see half of the contract or less, then there may be other things in the contract that you're not seeing. So it completely negates and undercuts the entire purpose of this motion. In fact, on that basis, Chair, I would even want to inquire if this amendment is even in order, because I think there are rules that prohibit negation amendments, and that may not. So whether I'll leave it to you to rule on whether that is a matter of order in terms of this being a effective negation of the intention of the original motion. But whether it is so formally, I certainly think it is so substantively, and certainly not something that we can support. It undermines the whole project that we've spent the day trying to work on, which is actually trying to understand what's going on here, actually delivering transparency for taxpayers. It negates and undermines the whole purpose of this exercise. So I may have more to say on this, but for the time being, I'll leave my remarks there. And I do hope that some common sense will prevail, at least on the opposition side, that we'll be able to actually have a motion. You know, we've already lost some of the provisions, but the main goal is we need to be able to get the contracts, or there's just no point. Thank you, Chair.
For on your thing, where did you leave it? Okay. We're Mr. Scheer now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to address a few of the comments that were made by the Liberal member at the floor a few moments ago. This notion that there's some obligation for Canadian taxpayers to be kept in the dark about this deal is just so bogus. there are lots of occasions where it's appropriate and necessary to keep some details from the public when the government's interacting with certain suppliers, certain vendors, people or companies who win bids or contracts for various aspects. You can imagine a supplier that comes from the defense industry being hesitant about sharing every aspect of a contract, as it relates to subcontractors or where they source primary material from, or when the government puts out a call for bids for something, either an infrastructure piece or a procurement piece, that you might say, well, if the government is inviting other companies to bid on things and then entering into an agreement with that, because that company does other work with other competitors, we wouldn't want every aspect of how they arrived at their final contract or their final bid made public, because that might do some kind of commercial harm to the company that's bidding. But this is a different case altogether. This isn't that the government has put out an open call for bids, a competitive process where every company that's has expertise or capability has the opportunity to bid, and that independent, objective public service experts analyze and score each application based on an agreed upon set of objective criteria. This is the government entering into basically what amounts to a sole source contract. They decided that they would enter into this agreement with Stellantis in one case and Northvolt with another. They are using almost $50 billion of taxpayers' money to underwrite these plants, these assembly plants. And in so doing, they've made the Canadian taxpayer a partner, certainly at the very least a shareholder in this enterprise. Every Canadian who pays taxes will have to pay for part of this contract. So just like any other business would have to answer to its shareholders as to where the board, where the CEO is spending money, so too is it appropriate on the taxpayer side here. We have a situation where we only found out about this problem months after the original announcement was made. So the Liberal had the floor before me from the Windsor area. He says he's proud of this, that this is great news. Great. Well, if he's so proud of it, show your work. Let's stick the contract on the fridge with a big sticker on it. If he's so proud of it, let's let everyone take a look at it. But no, he's not doing that. From every step along the way, the government has asked us to just trust them. As soon as this deal was announced, Conservatives asked to see the contract. Simply put out there that we just want to be able to evaluate, to do our due diligence as an oversight body, whether it's this committee or Parliament in general. Just wanted to take a look at the contract to decide for ourselves and to allow Canadians to decide for themselves whether or not they believe it's a good deal, whether or not they believe that there's adequate safeguards for Canadian jobs, whether or not they believe that there will be the return on investment as was promised. The government refused. They asked us to just trust them. They refused to make the contract public. And then reports came out about the foreign replacement workers. And this brings me to the point about the amendment from the Bloc, and where I would respectfully disagree with this amendment, because we know today that there is a problem with foreign replacement workers because of these reports, because of other avenues that this information has come to light. That's why we're focused on replacement workers specifically. But there could be other aspects of the contract that don't adequately protect taxpayers' investment in a whole variety of areas that we might never know about if we don't see the contract, that we might find out months after this study is over when another whistleblower calls out an aspect of this deal that disadvantages Canadian workers or Canadian taxpayers. And as my colleague, Mr. Perkins, pointed out, we all know as legislators, we all see legislation where there are cross-references to other acts and other sections, and there are all kinds of scenarios we could imagine where if we only got a limited number of sections on a piece of legislation, it might reference other portions of an act. It might reference other acts that we would not have necessarily in front of us without going and finding them all. The analogy I'm trying to make is that within a contract, there could very well be aspects that speak specifically to replacement workers or job guarantees, but might reference other sections that we would never have access. We would never have a full picture of what's actually being presented or may not be safeguarded. So that's why we really do need the whole piece in order to evaluate any given clause or any given section that might just narrowly touch on workers. We really need to be able to see that as part of a comprehensive piece to make a real evaluation. It's the same thing when we analyze a proposed piece of legislation. The government comes in and tables a bill. Well, many of the sections might just be one or two lines about an amendment to another act. Well, what do? We all go see what the other act says, and we look at that and say, okay, this section of this bill amends that section in this way. We have them both in front of us. We come to a decision. We come to a more informed decision when we're aware of not just what's in front of us, but other related topics that are covered in other bills and other acts. So that's the analogy I'm trying to make with solely focusing narrowly on what the block amendment would give effect. So for those reasons, I would urge my colleague respectfully to take a look at that and wonder if we don't, rather than really getting to the bottom of this multi-billion-dollar deal, and I think we have to really think about that too. For my Liberal colleagues who keep hiding behind protecting their corporate friends, we have to consider this in the scale. These are.
Point of order.
Sorry. Point of order from someone, I'm sorry?
Yeah, me.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Perkins.
I'm sorry to interrupt my colleague, the House Leader.
Call relevance on.
So, but I'm still contemplating the point that MP Jenis made earlier, which is I actually don't believe this amendment's in order because it takes out the requirement to release the contract and replaces it with one thin thing, which is anything mentioning temporary foreign workers, and that's all that would be released. And I can tell you the contract doesn't mention temporary foreign workers. I can guarantee you that. And a French language element. So I think it's out of order because it's a substantive change that changes the very nature of the motion itself, from the full contract to one minor aspect of employment. And perhaps Mr. Jenis might have more to add on that point. But.
Yeah, thanks. I've been chatting during Mr. Scheer's talk. We have been talking about Mr. Jenis's comments about it being out of order. I'm reading it the same as the clerks, differently from yourself. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just suspend for a couple seconds to discuss this, whether the out of order issue, because the French, and we're also reading the French version as well. I just want to make sure we're all reading the same thing and the same intent of the motion. So we'll just suspend for a few moments, okay? And then we'll go back to Mr. Scheer. an indication from Mrs. Vignolet that we have a general understanding of the kind of language issue, and she's putting forward a request to withdraw her motion. If we can have agreement to everyone. She's withdrawing her motion, or her amendment, yes, withdrawing it. If we're fine with that. Thanks, it is withdrawn. And then the floor is back with Mrs. Vignola. Go ahead, please.
So, thank you for allowing me to withdraw the amendment and to withdraw any language issues. Here's what I'm proposing. Still the same paragraph. An order do issue for the production of copies of the any contract, memorandum of understanding, or any other agreement between any minister, department, agency, or Crown Corporation of Canada and the Government of Canada, and including any provisions concerning the hiring and the use of foreign workers, and which deals with the language requirements and the language of work. Is that clearer for everyone?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll have the clerk read it into English as well to make sure we're all on the same page.
Question. I believe the motion that Ms. Vignola is putting forward has two parts. The G and H still in it. So I think that needs to be withdrawn.
No, I think I've mentioned that already with the clerk. So
that's
not.
It's okay.
Not, and the 1, 2, 3 is also.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So thank you.
It's very similar to the other one, so we're just going to read it back in English and French rather than spend time sending to everyone's P9, if that's okay. It's so similar.
Can you guys send it to the P9, please?
Yes, we can. It's going to be just a few moments delay while we do so. Colleagues, we're going to be a couple moments, so we will suspend. finish at 8:30, so the motion has been distributed in both languages. I will turn the floor back to Mrs. Vignola, please, for her amendment.
I'm sorry, but what I received at 8:20 is not what I said. No, that's not what I said. I sent it to you in French. I sent it to you, I sent the text in French, and what I'm seeing in English is not what I sent in French.
Let me check with the clerk.
Non. Non, en anglais, c'est pas. En français, c'est.
No, in French it's not right either.
Sorry, we'll suspend again for another moment. The clerks are going to look at the translation. I think maybe the wrong version went out. We are back, and Ms. Vignola has the floor, and I understand it is the correct one. So please go ahead, Mrs. Vignola. And then we have, speaking on this amendment, Mr. Sousa, and then Mr. Chouari. And then I see Mr. Kuzmirchuk has his hand up. Go ahead, Ms. Vignola.
Donc, très rapidement.
Well, very quickly, the amendment that you just received is the correct one, which highlights the information that we are seeking, in particular, that an order due issue for the production of copies on any contract, memorandum of understanding, or other government between any minister, department, agency, or crown corporation of the and concerning the use of foreign workers. And, well, there's some repetition here. And language requirements and language of work. So there is the use of hiring and use of foreign workers. And some people said yes, but paragraphs G and H are not there, so that's okay. So if there were not any attempts to remove G and H, it should not be there. There you have it. So I think that emphasizes what we're seeking is for information, while allowing us to open the door to discussing contracts. There you have it. And this is the consensus building that I'm trying to achieve.
Thanks. Mr. Sousa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to the amendment, we recognize that there's another stakeholder in all of this, right? So the Conservative Party of Ontario, the government of Ontario, is also very involved and engaged in the foreign workers, as well as the engagement of this contract and the enablement of what we are doing. So I find it ironic there, too, that the Conservative cousins are not really aligned now with what is being proposed in regards to the opening and the divulging of the contracts. But we agree that it's important for us to have a review as proposed regarding the labor market impact assessments, was also part of this amendment, right? We call for that, and we recognize that that's an important piece, which dovetails with what the member is asking in respect to those contracts being divulged through her amendment to it. So that's important. And I know that we're also sensitive about time, and I'm just concerned now that as a result of the expiry of time and the resources, that we'll suspend yet again, and let it be known that as a consequence, we're not going to have the member, our OGGO tomorrow will be presumably postponed in order to continue with this issue as we proceed forward. But I just wanted to add that there are other considerations that I don't think are being taken into that are being taken, but it's important, and we agree with the proposed amendment, including the contracts that are being here, provided we do that with the sense of sensitivity, recognizing the exposure that this has with the competitive nature of Ontario and Canada going forward with other similar foreign direct investment opportunities. So I'd leave it at that. We're back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Sousa. Mr. Chouari.
Okay. So we've now spent 4 hours on trying to get a copy of this contract, which we're very comfortable to start with, having a redacted copy to see whether we are comfortable with seeking what we want to see. We also agreed to including the hiring plan submitted to the Government of Canada during the process of incentive negotiation, which basically brings into light the fact that there was a hiring plan. It is clearly, and we've been told by LG Energy Solution that they've confirmed they're going to hire 2,500 Canadians. They've already hired about 130, and they are going. They continue to hire as per the hiring plan submitted to the Government of Canada. So when we look at the contract, we're starting with the redacted one. I am hoping that the hiring plan submitted to the Government of Canada is not part of that redactment, because that basically opens up and answers the question that everyone is having around how many foreign workers, for what purposes they're coming here, how many of them are part-time or not.
We're running short of time. Can I bring you back to Ms. Vignola's motion specifically?
Sure. So we are comfortable with that motion so long as we agree on the fact that we will look at the redacted contract first, and then if need be, we'll move into private setting and look at the unredacted.
Can I clarify? I don't see anything in her motion about redaction. I just want to make sure we're on the right one again.
So we support that motion, but we would be moving another motion in subsequent to that.
Okay, I have Mr. Can I move on? We have Mr. Kuzmierczak. You've had a couple of your colleagues have shown support. Are you ready to move ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczak, and we can vote on Ms. Vignola's amendment? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and you know, I wanted to reiterate what my colleague, Mr. Sousa, had mentioned, that again and I appreciate the collaboration right now between all the partners around the table from the various parties, and it does seem like we're finally zeroing in on sort of the substance of what we're trying to get at, and the clarity that we want to be able to share with Canadians. The good news story, which is that, again, you have investment after investment after investment bringing thousands of jobs to communities like Windsor. And you know, we want to share that good news with Canadians, and we want to share that good news with communities. At the same time, I understand what Mr. Sousa had said, and I agree that we do need to find a balance that also
Mr. Kuzmierczak, and I apologize for cutting you off, and I try not to do this at all, but we've down to a couple minutes. I'm wondering if we seem to have general agreement, at least to address Ms. Vignola's motion. I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. If perhaps we can get to the motion, and if there's a will to vote on it in the next couple moments.
Is this the amendment to the motion?
This is the amendment. I apologize to Ms. Vignola's amendment.
Oh, okay, gotcha. No, I just wanted to say I feel like we're finally moving towards a balance. That balance is, again, sharing the good news, the information with Canadians, but making sure that we don't put the we don't put the actual agreements present and future at risk. I think that's what we're trying to strike, that balance, to be responsible. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Kuzmierczak. Are we ready to vote on Mrs. Vignola's amendment? On division? No, it seems like we have unanimous consent to pass it. And with that, colleagues, we have Mr. Duclos, Minister Duclos, here tomorrow. We will look forward to hearing more from him. I understand, I think it was Mr. Sousa was commenting about that. I think there will be a way. We'll certainly be addressed.
We're not done. We still have work. We haven't completed this work.
But we are out of resources, so we are.
So we continue tomorrow. Do we not? Isn't that appropriate?
Excuse me a second.
On the main motion.
Yeah, on this motion.
We're on the main motion. We haven't voted yet.
No, we have not voted on the main motion. We're not forcing that ahead. We do have Mr. Duclos here tomorrow, and I assume we will suspend, and we will hear from Mr. Duclos.
Can we suspend,
Minister,
please? Suspend,
Mr.
please?
Sousa, if you would let me speak, I will speak. It's a long day, but please let me finish. Thank you. We will see Minister Duclos tomorrow. We will have questions in that forum, but we are suspended right now. Thank you.
We don't have consent.
We're suspended.